I'm Philippa from Wellspirit, and I'm delighted to be joined by Stephanie Pow from Crayon. Crayon is a New Zealand resource and an online platform that turns parental leave, rules, and return to work policies into clear, practical guidance for employers and parents. Stephanie has a huge passion to help parents across New Zealand understand their legal and financial entitlements, which helps them plan their leave and return, and also navigate employer policies with confidence. So, Stephanie, I'm so grateful that you're here joining me in this conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me, Philippa. It's a topic I love to talk about. At Crayon, our mission is to reduce financial stress in the moments that matter. Personal finance and finances more broadly is my background. And one of those big moments that we focus on is having a child, and parental leave entitlements and return to work policies, as you touched on, play a big role in how parents, their financial well-being, both before, during, and also after parental leave. And we also run the New Zealand Parental Leave Register as part of our work. So anyone can come onto our website and see over 350 verified parental leave policies from employers across the country. We hold the largest database of this information, so we do have the wonderful privilege of reading all these policies and also seeing how innovative employers are becoming in investing in this space.
It's such an important resource because when you're going through parental leave and going back to work, being able to know and understand what employers are actually offering across New Zealand and what other women are benefiting from can really help inform you to make the right choices. So, really great work you're doing, Stephanie. Let's kick off our conversation because I think one of the things that you can really help the women in our community understand financial and legal entitlements, whether that's government paid parental leave, employer obligations, things such as keeping touch days, annual leave and how it's calculated and when and what is covered and what's not, public holidays. I'd love you to take one or two of those topics and tell us a little bit more around what women should know in terms of what they're really entitled to. So
there is so much we can cover, and that's one of the things I discovered when I became a parent, and then as we were building Crayon, is just how complex this area is, or how much there is to know and navigate when you're also juggling the physical impact of being pregnant or preparing for adoption and all of that mental load. Plus, you're trying to keep your head above water at work. And then you're also trying to become a parental leave expert at the same time. And it's a lot to ask of parents, which is why we started Crayon. And there are a number of free resources and blog articles on our website if anyone wants to go and have a look separately. But to answer your question, what are one or two things to pick off? From a financial well-being perspective, the big ones would be government paid parental leave. So in New Zealand, primary carers, and that's defined as the birth parent. It can also be your partner or spouse if you decide to transfer some of all of your paid parental leave to them. And it can be for anyone who's taking permanent primary responsibility for a child under 6, so adoption, surrogacy, permanent placements, or permanent guardianship all count. So that's the first part, is who is a primary carer. The second is what the entitlement is. And in New Zealand, that can be up to 26 weeks, paid at up to a cap of $788.66 before tax each week. And that amount changes every year from the 1st of July. But it is worth noting that is below full-time minimum wage. So for a lot of primary carers, they will be taking a financial hit when they go on parental leave, unless their employer does something above and beyond that. And the third part is qualifying criteria. So in order to be entitled to government paid parental leave, you need to be a primary carer, and you need to have worked for any of the 26 weeks in the 52 weeks before your expected due date or placement date. And that's for at least an average of 10 hours per week. So there are very clear guidance, and they are applied strictly. So it's important to know that that criteria applies for every child that you have. So particularly if you've got anyone in your community who is thinking about having another kid, it's important to understand that if you want to be entitled to government paid parental leave again, you do need to go back to work. You do need to have worked at least 26 weeks at an average of at least 10 hours per week. And we do hear from parents who, have kids in quick succession and sometimes just miss that cutoff. And again, it's a hard cutoff. So it's important to know what that criteria is. And the last part about government paid parental leave is you can transfer some or all of it to your partner. There are some very strict transfer rules, which in the interest of time, I won't cover today, but you can find more information on the IRD website. We also cover it on our website. It's not very common, so maybe 2 to 3% of paid parental leave is transferred. Most of the time it is all taken by the primary carer. But we are seeing in our work, we do financial coaching for expecting parents. We are seeing many more fathers and partners want to be able to take time out to be more active in those early days and exploring what those transfers can look like. So that would be one big entitlement. The second one is around KiwiSaver. So in New Zealand, women's KiwiSaver balances are on average 25% lower than men's. And there are a number of factors, but one of those is because we are more likely to take time out of the paid workforce for caregiving duties, such as parental leave or working part-time, etc. So it can be quite a big gap by the time you reach retirement age of 65. A couple of things. One is that from the 1st of July 2024, the government started making matching KiwiSaver contributions on government paid parental leave. So if you opt in to contribute 3% from PPL, and then the government will match another 3% on top of that, that's new. When you go to apply for paid parental leave, the default is that KiwiSaver is not deducted. So if you want to benefit from that government matching, you will need to, it's just a box, but you will need to proactively tick that. So that's one. And more employers are also doing more in that space, and we can probably cover that a bit later. And then the last one, if I can have three, is around annual leave. And I think you touched on this. I'm sure there's some members in your community who found out the hard way. But in New Zealand, after you've taken parental leave, when you come back to work, any annual leave you become entitled to on parental leave or in the 12 months after your return is paid at your average weekly wage only. So there is no comparison to your normal salary or wages. It looks at what you've earned over the 12 months before you take annual leave. Now, if you take a year of parental leave and your employer doesn't have any top-ups or any other paid leave, when you come back to work, that annual leave you became entitled to on parental leave is worth pretty much close to zero. So people will write in and say, well, I just came back from parental leave. I really needed to take a day off. I took annual leave. I don't understand why I got paid $6 an hour. How can that be right? And that is right under the law. That you might have seen headlines that it's up for change, and it has been up for change since 2019. So hopefully those changes come through, but they're still around, and it's something to be aware of. But for some parents, it can make sense to drain their annual leave balance before they go on parental leave to realize the full financial value of that. And then the longer you've been back at work, the more your average weekly pay will increase. And so the later you take it, sometimes the more valuable it can be. So they're just things that can be helpful to know because it might influence decisions that you make early on.
Yes. And it is important to know those things. Like even that checkbox that you mentioned before and that pop-up, like if you're not actively looking for it or know about it and you're doing things in a hurry. One of the things that even for me, I wasn't aware of when I first came back to lead a big team in New Zealand, coming back from overseas, was keep in touch days. Can you talk to those in terms of what are the entitlements? That'd be great.
So while you're receiving government paid parental leave, so over that 26 weeks, you can work up to 64 paid hours called keeping in touch hours. And you want to make sure you do not work them within the first 28 days. That is a hard rule. There was an unfortunate case last year where a woman went into work to help for a couple of hours within the first 28 days. And at that point, the government deems you to have returned to work. So she lost the rest of her government paid parental leave entitlement. So that is a hard rule they will enforce. And then you don't want to work more than 64 because, again, the government will consider you to have returned to work and will stop any further payments. So you can work 64 hours. After that, it's about how you and your employer agree on how those hours are worked. So it might be full days, it might be half days, it might be a couple of hours at a time. And agree, again, you can agree on, is it for offsites, team meetings? Is it to help you prepare to return to work, training and development opportunities? It doesn't need to be your day-to-day job. It can be related to your job. It doesn't need to be that, if you're normally, for example, on the front line answering phones, that you don't need to use your keeping in touch hours just for that. It could be for training and other purposes. So we always think it's a good idea to chat to your manager
Mm-hmm.
about it if you think you might want to use it even before you go on leave, with the understanding that, of course, things might change after baby arrives. But it can be good to have a heads up about what it might look like, when you might want to use them, what might be appropriate uses of that as well. If you're taking more than 6 months, then once you finish government paid parental leave, you can work as much or as little as you like. That's again between you and your employer. There's no cap. After that point, it would really just be kind of casual work that you might do with your employer. So again, by negotiation. And keeping in touch hours, your employer can't make you work them. You can only work them if your employer agrees. So there are, get to your point, a few rules around how they work. You want to make sure you understand those. The IRD website and our website also has more details, but they can be a great way to feel like you're still in touch with work. And then on the other flip side, there are some people who don't want to hear from work at all, and that's also totally fine.
Yeah, I loved that transition back into the workplace, then being available to be determined how best to suit the individual as well, whether, as you mentioned before, it's keeping up with in-house training or, AI upskilling or whatever it is that can help ease the path back into the workplace. What would you say for any mum listening, if you could just summarize, like, what are the 3 entitlements that every mum should know about?
So we've covered government paid parental leave. The second one would be preterm payments. So New Zealand is actually an early leader on this globally. If you have a child before 37 weeks gestation, there are additional entitlements that you might be eligible for. So basically, if you're eligible for government paid parental leave, you will be eligible for preterm payments. They're paid at the same rate. And then you can have the 26 weeks of government paid parental leave afterwards. So you'll get paid from when your child's born to what would have been the end of that 36 weeks gestation. So that's one thing. And there are additional keeping in touch hours if you're getting preterm payments. So that's one. The second, or the third, I should say, is around what happens when things don't go to plan. So yeah, I want to acknowledge it can be very difficult if you experience a pregnancy loss, but it is, again, worth knowing what you're entitled to support you, so that finances aren't something else you also have to stress about while you're going through that process. In New Zealand, if you're entitled to government paid parental leave, you remain entitled to that. If you experience a pregnancy loss, whether that's a miscarriage or a stillbirth, not everyone's aware of that. You're also, if you've been at your employer for 6 months or more, entitled to 3 days of paid bereavement leave as well. So it's just helpful to know, and that's for you and your partner, the bereavement leave days. So that's available. In New Zealand, we have no paid partners leave. That's actually we are one of 3 developed countries with no paid partners leave at all. And I would love to see that change. I certainly make no secret of that part, because I think dads and partners play such a critical role in everybody's well-being in those early stages, but there is no entitlement there. So you can transfer some of your primary care entitlement, but there's no separate entitlement for dads and partners here.
Yeah, so that's really informative. So thanks, Stephanie, for clarifying that. So what would be really interesting to explore now is, what are the things that employers are currently offering in terms of either top-ups to the government policies and benefits? What would you describe as some really great best-in-class examples that employers are currently offering? And
sure. So across the 350 employers that we have on the register, we see a range of policies. And one of the most encouraging parts of the work that we do, and the register's been running about 2 years now, is even in that short time, there's been quite a lot of change in this space. So I think a decade ago, it would have been, a handful of leading employers offering paid parental leave. How much does a primary carer get? And then partners, having paid leave became more of a thing as well. But now we're really seeing employers think about all the different paths to parenthood. What does it look like to support employees before they go on leave, while they're on leave, and on their return to work, and when things don't go to plan? And so some of those policies that we see are really robust across the board in all of those areas. There's a lot to potentially touch on, but to answer your question around paid parental leave, in New Zealand, for primary carers, we see 2 main types of paid parental leave. One is what you call the top-up, and that's where, let's just use some round figures. So let's say you're earning $1,000 per week. Then the employer will say, whatever you're getting from the government, we'll deduct that from the 1,000, but we'll kind of make you whole. So let's call the government payments, $790 or thereabouts. So the employer will pay you the extra $210 a week, and so you're getting the $1,000 between the employer and the government. And top-ups, we see they can range anywhere from 2 weeks all the way to 26 weeks. That's how it runs the full gamut. And there are a number of employers now who offer a 26-week top-up. The other type of paid leave we see for primary carers is just straight salary. So it's basically saying you can get what you get from the government, plus we'll just pay you your normal salary as well. And again, that will range from a week all the way to 26 weeks. So there are a handful of employers who will let you get the full government entitlements for 26 weeks, plus 26 weeks of salary or base earnings from them. So that's the primary carer side. And then for partners leave, what's also really encouraging is a number of employers now offer paid partners leave. The most common is to say that the unpaid entitlement that you get from the government, which is up to 2 weeks of unpaid partners leave, they'll pay. So there are a number of employers who offer 2 weeks, but that can also range all the way to 26 weeks. So there are some employers who will offer dads and partners 6 months of paid leave, often to be used within the first 2 years of a child's arrival. It's also important to know that because they are policies determined by that employer, they will have separate eligibility criteria. That's something we do document because it's really important to know, do you need to be, for example, on a permanent contract, or do you need to complete a certain amount of tenure to be eligible for this? And some employers will make their benefits available from day one, and then others might require 2 years plus of continuous employment to qualify. So really important to know. And then the last part of that criteria is around what we call bonding. So because it is a significant investment for employers, they sometimes will apply what we call bonding, which is where either they'll hold back some of that payment until you return to work. So they might pay an installment before you go and an installment when you come back, or they'll pay it at the time that you take leave. But if you don't return or you don't complete a certain amount of service, usually somewhere between 6 to 12 months, but we have seen 24 months as an example, then you need to pay back some of that parental leave that you got from them. So again, just really important to know, because let's say you're planning or hoping to have 2 children. If your employer has a year to qualify for their paid parental leave, then you decide to take a year, then you need to come back and work another year to qualify again, and then you take a parental leave again, and then there's a 12-month bonding. That's actually a 5-year commitment that you're making to that employer. And it's wonderful that you get to benefit from their policy, but I think you want to know that up front, because employment and policies and even your government entitlements, you want to make sure you understand how all this works, because it can potentially matter. And one thing we didn't touch on in our earlier conversation is the criteria to be entitled to the money from the government is different to the criteria to being entitled to take time off from your employer. So if you want to take 6 months off, you need to be at that employer for 6 months, again, at an average of 10 hours per week. If you want to be able to take 12 months off, which is the maximum under the law, you need to have been there 12 months. And again, every time you have a child, if you have more than one, you need to come back and complete those service requirements to requalify again. So it's actually possible if you change jobs during, say, late during your pregnancy or close to your adoption, you can be entitled to the money, but not the time off to receive the money, and you have to negotiate with your employer. So it's those kind of ins and outs that you want to be familiar with.
I mean, it's essential knowledge, really, when you're coming to plan a family. As you said, it's like a 5-year window that you almost need to be considering to say, look, if financial income is super critical for my family, what does that career plan look like for 5 years in my company? And is that a good fit for me? Do I foresee myself being in there? Otherwise, it really becomes a consideration of, what does a single income look like over the time that we're navigating and raising family. So there are really important conversations to have, with your partner up front in terms of what that looks like. But you can only have those conversations if you know this information. So that is essential knowledge, isn't it?
Absolutely. And look, the reality is I think more and more couples in New Zealand require both incomes to pay the mortgage or make rent, and just with cost of living, it's harder and harder to be a family on one income.
Yeah, it is. And one of the things that I'd also love to touch on, because I hear it as almost a little bit more commonplace than it ever has been, is almost staging of a return when you come back from parental leave. And I love that concept because that's something I didn't have when I came back to work. But being able to ease your way back in, working maybe 3 days a week for 6 months, or staggering it back from 3 to 4, back up to full time. What does that look like now from when you observe those sorts of benefits across, the bigger employers? Is that really commonplace and offering?
I would describe it as a growing trend. I don't know that it would necessarily be commonplace, but I think more and more employers are open to that type of arrangement and will explicitly put it in their parental leave policy as something. It always depends on the role and the job type, right, about how it can be done. But more employers are flagging that it is a conversation they want to have with employees, and I think that's really encouraging. And you're right, I always say to parents, it can be quite jarring to go from full-time care of your baby or your child to being full-time back at work. It's like flicking a switch. And it's hard for everyone. Often you want to be able to settle your child into childcare. It's a change of routine for the family, getting out the door in the morning, all of that can be hard. So there are some employers who actually now will do what we call a fully funded phased return. And what I mean by that is they will have in their policy something along the lines of, you can work 80% of your hours, but be paid 100% of your salary for a period of time. And that can range from 4 weeks generally to 26 weeks at the outside. And again, that tries to take some of that financial strain off parents as they do that phased return, which is very encouraging. The other way I've seen it done is, we talked about annual leave and how it can be paid at the lower rate. 60% of the employers on our register just pay you your normal rate. You don't take a hit for having gone on parental leave, which is great because you often do need a break, and burnout is a thing, particularly for returning parents. So with employers essentially preserving the value of your leave. And the other important part here is that you continue to accrue while you're on parental leave. So if you're away for a year, you'll accrue your minimum 4 weeks while you're off. I'm seeing more parents where their employer pays the proper rate to use that annual leave to do the phased return. So it might be that you come back 3 days a week and you take 2 days of annual leave for the first 4 weeks, and you maybe ratchet up to 4 days a week and take a day of annual leave, and you use your annual leave balance that way. That can be quite a nice way to return. Because often with childcare, particularly if you're going down the daycare route, it can be hard to secure a spot, and it might be even hard to secure specific days that you need. And so sometimes you need to pay for the full rate from the beginning, even if you don't need all the days, just to secure that spot. Or the other thing I've seen is often the difference between paying for 4 days of childcare and 5 days of childcare is very minimal. In fact, I've seen places where they'll advertise pay for 4 days, get the 5th day free, because they know it is getting more common for parents to work 4 days. So they, to fill the role, etc. The difference between 4 or 5 days isn't very much. So even while you might be paying slightly reduced childcare, it can be still quite a high amount of outgoings. And in New Zealand, we have some of the most expensive childcare in the world as a percentage of income. So a family earning average wage with 2 kids in full-time daycare can expect to spend around a third of their income just on childcare, right? That's before housing, before food, before transportation, all of that. So again, employers are seeing that and saying, look, well, we know it's a transition. We don't want you to take a financial hit. We want you to come back and be successful in that role. And so they're supporting that phased return. So rather than working 3 days, get paid 3 days, you're able to work, say, 3 days and get paid 4 or something along those lines.
Yeah, it's such a hard transition, and you're dealing with transitioning yourself back into the workplace, transitioning your baby or small children into daycare, and then you're dealing with sickness as well. So just having a little bit of flex when you come back can really make a big difference. Like, what could be the common or the biggest financial pitfalls that women and families can find themselves in when it comes to then figuring out what's next for them and their career, whether it's understanding the actual cost of childcare and the fees that they might not have adequately budgeted for, whether it's holiday pay misunderstandings. Talk us through some of the things that people should be aware of in terms of financial pitfalls.
Yeah, sure. And look, we have the enormous joy of working with a number of parents as they're preparing financially to have a child. I think the first one is not getting into the nuts and bolts of how your income is going to change. Often when people think about budgeting for baby, they think about the cost of a pram and a car seat and the gear, and that is important. But the loss of income is often multiples of what that gear is going to cost you. I think understanding how your income is going to change throughout parental leave, depending on whether you're getting government paid leave, employer policies, unpaid leave, that would be one. And also, if you want to go back part-time or reduced hours, what is that going to look like financially for your family? So that's one. The second you touched on is childcare. So both the cost of childcare, and it can vary wildly. So for example, full-time childcare, we've seen anywhere from say $250 a week to $450 a week, and that's a huge difference. And when we do the numbers for people, it's not unusual for full-time care for it to be in that kind of $15,000 to $20,000 a year, which is really the equivalent of private school fees in New Zealand. And so it's quite the sticker shock for parents. So even when you're pregnant, go have a look at some centres near you. Get some fee schedules. Most of them don't have it on their website. And so you want to understand what that looks like. There's a great website called Kindello, spelled Kindello. It's like an Airbnb for childcare. So you can go in, put your address in. It will show every daycare centre in New Zealand, as well as a number of home-based play centre, kohanga kindergartens, etc. So it's a great way to make a short list. You can book appointments, see some photos, but I would really encourage you to go in person, because there are a lot of different philosophies when it comes to early childhood. One will vibe or more with you than others. You can, when you walk in, you'll pretty quickly figure out whether that's a place you're going to love dropping your kid off to or not. And you want to get onto it early, because there are wait lists, sometimes 12 months plus, depending on where you live and how in demand that centre is. So again, understanding what that looks like, getting your kid on a wait list. You will just feel so much better about going back to work if you're happy with the place that you're dropping your kid off to every morning. It makes a huge difference to your mental well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. And even from my own experience, I always expected that my child would go to a daycare, and that's what I was budgeting on. But it transpired that I couldn't get my child into the daycare when I needed to, because I was shifting location. And then all of a sudden, my budget is then having to cover a nanny for the first sort of year of my child's life. And that was fine, but it was just an unexpected budgetary item. So I think, planning for a couple of scenarios as well, if you need to, is something that could be useful as well.
Absolutely. And there is, nannies in New Zealand, their rate has gone up quite a bit over COVID. Pre-COVID, it was probably like 20-25 an hour. Now you're kind of looking at like 35 plus an hour. And again, if you can do it, it can be the right choice for your family, but you want to be able to, it's a huge budget consideration, to your point. And sometimes we see people do nanny for a period of time, then switch into daycare, and or it might be family help, and what does that look like? And having those conversations with family members early. There are some grandparents who do love to have a day that's theirs, and there are others who might be there more if your child's sick and and you need them to step in at the last minute, right? So having those conversations with family around what that might look like is also important. So childcare is a huge cost item. The other part of it is thinking about the ongoing costs. So again, budgeting for gear is great, but whether it's nappies, whether it's formula, whether it's health insurance, if you go down that path for your child, there are a number of ongoing things that you want to be able to put into your budget and think about how that's going to change. And that's a lot of the work that we do for people, is thinking through, what are the decisions that you need to make? What are the levers? Even diapers, or as an example, if you go down the disposable route and your kid toilet trains at say 2.5, which is kind of the average, you could be looking at like $3,500 to $4,000 just on diapers in a time.
Absolutely. And there's always like hidden expenses as well. I always sort of think back to my son, and and it's sort of like the sickness, and a lot of it's covered financially, but there are also other things that might not be financially covered. So I think it's also really important just to have like almost a surplus pool as well for any kind of unexpected,
there are more things that can
by contingency.
Wrong, or things that you need to step in for financially, 100%.
What I would love to cover off as our final section, Stephanie, is if a woman is in a workplace and feels that she could really gain more benefit, whether that's from flexibility, whether that's looking at just staggering a return, or something that she knows that even women are getting elsewhere and her workplace isn't currently providing for it, what would you say would be your advice to women to ask for in a workplace as something that could just be a reasonable request? And how could they possibly frame it?
Sure. We have a wonderful guide on our website. We interviewed Dr. Ellen Joan Nelson, who, I don't know if you've come across her, but she is the leader of Work School Hours movement. And she goes through how to ask for flexible working, and it's a step-by-step guide. So I highly recommend having a look at our website. But what she does cover is, first of all, think about it from your employer's perspective. Put yourself in your manager's shoes. They've probably got KPIs that they need to meet. This has been a pretty tough environment for a lot of employers, whether that's public sector and layoffs or whether it's private sector and just margins getting crunched, etc. So have some appreciation for the environment that your employer and you find yourselves in. But a big part of what she talks about is focusing on outputs and outcomes, right? That's ultimately what matters, not necessarily inputs or how many hours you're in a seat, but what is it that you're producing and how is that going to move the needle for your organization? So a big part of her talking guide is around agreeing on what those outputs and those outcomes look like, and then finding a way with your employer and framing it as an experiment. Like, this is something, let's give it a go for a month or 3 months, and let's evaluate monthly about how it's going. De-risk it for them, rather than making them like, I want to work part-time permanently for this, and suddenly it's like a big deal for them to do a proof of concept.
And they're on the line, basically, aren't they? So de-risking is a really great word to use, and if you can frame it as a way to de-risk, absolutely.
Yes. A big part of it. If you think about financial benefits during parental leave and you're trying to negotiate those, you may or may not want to do this. But again, if you can think about de-risking it, some of the ways you might be able to do that is around potentially committing to coming back for a period of time. If this is an investment in retention, you may not want to handcuff yourself in that way, and I understand that. But if you're reasonably confident you want to come back, that could be one way of saying, look, I'm going to make a commitment to look like this, and kind of make it worth their while in a way. So that could be another way. Sometimes it might be that they don't do paid leave, but get your annual leave paid at its full rate, right? Like, there are different levers you can have. Maybe it's a KiwiSaver lump sum contribution. There are different ways you can get paid. Maybe it's a bit of extra leave. So there are some employers on our register who offer, they call it some version of new child sick leave, or so that when you come back to work, you have extra 6 days above and beyond your normal sick leave allocation, recognizing that even a healthy child gets close to 8 to 12 respiratory infections in a given year, plus all the wonderful bugs that you get from daycare. So maybe it's good. So think about what are the different levers. If it's not paid leave that's on the table, there may still be other ways you can get supported. Maybe it's actually return to work coaching. That's one thing we're seeing more, is recognizing that it is a big transition for someone to have a child and come back to work. And so there are specialist coaches who help mums and dads make that adjustment and feel more supported. So maybe it's more of a professional development investment in coaching. So I would suggest, if you want to, looking for ideas, come to the register, have a look at different profiles, because you might get some inspiration of what that for you.
A really great source of inspiration, and even being able to see how it's framed up or what the right terminology is being kind of used can often be really helpful as well in terms of the conversation that you want to have with your manager. Great. Thank you, Stephanie. To close, what I'd love to ask you is, we've shared so much really amazing knowledge and policies. What would be your personal top 3 tips for returning mums, just to summarize?
For returning mums specifically? Okay. Think about your return ideally as early as possible. Even talk to your manager about what it might look like before you go on parental leave. If you're watching this and you're already on parental leave, it's not too late. I think the earlier you can start those conversations, the better, whether it's around the graduate work, whether it's around your role, might be around retraining and onboarding so that you are getting back up to speed quickly. Have a plan in place with them and check in with them. That would be one. The second is, beyond the nuts and bolts of your hours and things like that, have that career conversation with your manager. So the motherhood penalty exists. Part of that reason is around the assumptions and biases that people have around, frankly, working mums. So there is pretty robust research around how working mums are seen as less committed, less competent. There was one study where they sent out a bunch of CVs and they were identical, save for the fact that one made it clear someone was a mum, and they were far less likely to get a callback. And even now with AI screening, AI negatively counts parental leave on your CV. So that's all to say that there will be biases around like, oh, let's not give Philippa that big role coming up. She's just come back from parental leave and that role involves a lot of travel, or we don't want to put her under a lot of pressure. And so then you don't even get offered that role, right? You don't get the chance to decide whether you want to do it or not. That can happen, and it's not necessarily from a bad place, but people might make those assumptions for you. So I'm always a big advocate of having more explicit conversations. You almost need to over communicate that you still want those opportunities, or maybe you don't. Maybe you want it to look differently, but be clear on that so people aren't making those decisions behind closed doors for you, and that you get to be an active part of that.
That's such a great tip, because things change when you're back, right? And then you might not want to travel, but equally you might be like, actually, I really want to travel. It's going to be a little break, a mini break for me. And I've got the childcare sorted. And it's just really important, as you say, to over communicate. That's really valuable advice. While you're right. Things change, assumptions change. And so over communication is really critical.
Especially if people are going to be making those assumptions for you. And then the third one is if you're weighing up whether to go back or not. And I understand that it's not just the financial conversation. There are so many factors in there. But if I do take an economic lens to it, often people think, is it worth going back? I've got to pay for childcare. That's really expensive. Maybe my salary after tax or my earnings after tax are only just going to clear that. Is it worth it? Like, is it worth the stress of sick days and rushing to work, rushing to pick up the kids and all the stress that it puts on us as a family? What I would say on that kind of decision is, firstly, acknowledging it is a much bigger conversation than just money. There are personal preferences and that those run deep. And, I don't think there's one right way or another. And I certainly don't impose my preferences on anybody else. But if you are thinking about it, like, yes, income and childcare, that's an important consideration, but do think about family income. Think about the investment in your career. It's not just the earnings today, but potentially what will that mean for future promotion, pay rises, being able to stay on that career track for you. Also around future paid parental leave, if having another child is on the cards for you, what does it mean to get government paid parental leave and potentially employer paid parental leave again? And what will it mean for your KiwiSaver as well if you're not contributing for a period of time? So there's no one right answer, but I guess I want to highlight that it's a much bigger picture than just what am I bringing home and what am I paying out in childcare. There is a longer term view in there. And it might still be that the right decision for you and your family is that you take time out of the paid workforce and do the very valuable unpaid work of being a caregiver. But again, having those conversations, and maybe it's with you and your partner if you've got one, around, okay, this is what I want to do, or we want to do, and we think this is best for the kids, and we can make it work financially. But actually, I still want to be able to contribute to my KiwiSaver to get the government matching every year, so I'm not falling behind. Or, maybe we need to talk about how we structure our finances, so I don't feel like I'm asking you for money. Like, there are quite a few of those conversations that need to happen so that you still feel empowered and got some financial independence during that period of time as well.
And I think sometimes decisions can change over time, right? Like, it's completely plausible that you may expect that you go back to work within 6 months, but then you might be back at work 6 months and actually change your mind, right? Or it might be the other way. And sometimes you don't know what your decision is or what the best path for you is until you're in it, and that's completely cool too. But really important to keep the broader considerations in play when you're having those conversations. So that brings us to the end of our conversation. You've touched on so much. It's been so informative. I think women are going to walk away from this really, really more clued in to what they need to be discussing either at home with their partner or with their manager and in their workplace. So I think this is a really critical conversation for a lot of women and their partners. So thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge and all of your wisdom. It's been fantastic. What I'd love for you to share now with our listeners is where they can find you, the resources, where they go online to find Crayon.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me, Philippa, and I hope it is a helpful conversation to your community. To find more information, our website is gocrayon.com. There, like I said, there are a number of free resources on there for parents and employers around doing parental leave better, as well as financial wellbeing, which is our broader mission. If you've got questions, feel free to drop us a line. There's a chat on our website, and I answer all of those, or you can email at hello@gocrayon.com. We respond to all our inquiries. We really do love helping parents understand their entitlements better, and I think the thing for me is for everyone to feel agency around this experience.
Absolutely. And look, I know there are topics that we didn't really have time to touch on today, whether it's childcare, government top-ups, or whether it's if someone's finding themselves in a redundancy type situation as well. So I hope in the future that we'll also get you back to talk some more. That would be fantastic. So
I would love that. And I think you're right, we didn't touch on the other government entitlements. So just very briefly, because I think it'd be a bit remiss not to touch on it, is there are working for family tax credits from the IRD. Sometimes there's support from WIN. So we've worked with some couples where normally when they're earning money, they're not eligible for support, but while they're on unpaid leave or reduced pay, they become eligible. So that's one thing worth looking into. There's Family Boost, which is a childcare rebate as well. And then there's a childcare subsidy through WINS. There are 20 hours ECE subsidy, which kicks in when your child's 3. So there are a number of other support, and a lot of those are if you don't apply, you don't get. So you do want to look into those to make sure you're not missing out.
And apply at the right timing too, as I learned the hard way as well. I left mine a little bit late. So that's really informative, and definitely it is so worth the time to go onto those websites and fully read everything, because you will always be surprised what you can sometimes be entitled to at different periods of motherhood too. So Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us. We'll end there, but everyone knows where to find you, so that's great, and I really hope to follow up this conversation with another one sometime in the future. So thanks so much.